Welcome back students to lecture number 21 in this series of Python programming course. So today we will be looking at assignment operators. Not assignment operators, sorry, comparison operators. Okay. So as the name suggests, comparison operators are operators that we use to compare two numbers or two variables actually. Okay. So first, so let's write two numbers. Num1 is equal to 15, num2 is equal to 2, and then write. So the first operator that we're going to write is num1 equal to num2. We want to check if number 1 is equal to number 2, but we know that if I write a single equal to, normally in math, to check that the two numbers are equal, we will do this, right? Num1 is equal to num2. If it is right, the answer will be true. If it is wrong, the answer will be false. Here num1 is 15 and num2 is 2, so the answer should be false. But in Python we cannot write like this. This is wrong. Why? Because this is the, if you write a single equal to sign, that will be considered as an assignment operator, the one that we did in the previous lecture. That number 2's value will be copied into number 1's value. So number 1 will become 2. This is what this code will do. Okay, this is what this code will do. So to check in reality if number 1 is equal to number 2, we need to write two equal to signs. So I am going to write num1 equal to num2. Now this is 15, this is 2, and the two are not equal, so the answer should be false. And to actually visualize this false answer, we need to put this thing in a print statement, right? You remember that whenever we want the output to be, this will result in false, but the false will not be printed out, or it might be printed out in Colab, but Colab is not a true Python interpreter. In a true Python interpreter development environment, the output is not displayed until and unless you put the thing in print. So if we write print num1 is equal to num2, it will be equal to print false, and false will be printed out. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Let's put it in print. And what do you think will be the answer? The answer should be false. Yes, that's correct. Okay, so this one is the equality operator. Okay, equal to is the equality operator. Okay, the second operator we are going to look at today is called not equal to. So if I want to check that number 1 is not equal to number 2, so if I write num1 is equal to 15 and num2 is equal to 2, same. Okay, and if I want to check if the two are not equal, this is the sign for not is in Python is this exclamation mark. Exclamation mark means not, equal means equal. So to check if number 1 is not equal to number 2, we will write like this: number 1 not equal to num2. And what do you think this thing should return? This thing is number 1 not equal to number 2. Is this a true statement or a false statement that number 1 is not equal to number 2? It's a true statement, because 15 is not equal to 2. This is the way we write it in math. We put a cut over the equal to sign. This is the math way to write it, and this is the Python way to write it. Okay, so num1 is not equal to num2. So when we print num1 not equal num2, we should get print, and we print it, we should get true. Num1 not equal to, you can put the not one by pressing shift and pressing 1. That will give you this not sign. Okay, num2, and let's just print this, and the output should be true, and it is true. Okay, so remember, this is just for writing. This thing is just for telling you that we are writing a comment after this. So not equal to is inequality operator. Okay, similarly we have this thing, number1 is greater than number2. This is the third operator. Okay, the greater than operator. Number1 is greater than number2. What do you think this should return? Is number1 greater than number2? Yes, number1 is greater than number2. So this should return a true. So the third output should be true. Let's run this and let's see. The third output is true. Okay, then the fourth one, number1 is less than number2. Is this statement true or false? That number1 is less than number2. It is false, right? Because number1 is 15, it is greater than number2. It is not less than number2. So this statement is false, and the corresponding output here is false. The fourth one is false. Similarly, we have number1 is greater than equal to number2. So what does this mean? Okay, so what does this mean? This means basically that, let me cut this out also. Let's say number1 is 15 and number2 is also 15. If I write number1 greater than equal to number2, this should return a true, because this means that number1 is either greater than or it is equal to number2. So number1 is either equal to or greater than number2. Okay, so that's what it is here also, right? Number1 is 15, number2 is 15. Number1 is not greater than, but number1 is equal to 15, right? So this should return a true. Here we have number1 is 15 and number2 is 2. So number1 is, when we check greater than equal to 2, this should be true, right? Because number1 is not equal to number2, but number1 is greater than number2. If even one of these two conditions is correct, the whole answer will be true. Okay, so here number1 is equal to number2, so number1, if I write print number1 greater than equal to number2, this should return a true. But here also number1 is greater than equal to number2, this statement is a true because okay, number 1 is not equal to number 2, that one is false, but number 1 is greater than number 2, right? 15 is greater than number 2, right? So even if one of these two conditions is true, the whole thing will be true. Okay, so the way to understand is number 1, you can write it in two conditions. Number 1 is greater than number 2, or number 1 is equal to number 2. We will see how to compound two statements like this, but this one, if this one is true and this one is false, true or false always gives you a true. Okay, we'll see this later also, but for right now just think of it this way, that we are checking two conditions, two separate conditions, one for greater and one for equal, and if even one of these two is true, the whole thing will be true. Okay, so that's why you can see here we are getting a true, here we are getting a true for this one. And lastly we have number 1 is less than equal to number 2. So number 1 less than equal to number 2, what do you think this is? This is true or false? We can write this split as number 1 is less than number 2, like this is only for our own imagination. Okay, less than number 2 or number 1 is equal to number 2. Which of these is true? So which of these two is one of these true? So this is false. Number 1 is not less than number 2, right? Number 1 is less than number 2. This is false. And this thing, number 1 is equal to number 2, is also false. So two falses with an or between them make a false. That's why the overall answer is false. This is the first lesson for today. Okay, so for the second lesson, we'll look at how to combine different statements. These are different comparison statements. These statements are called comparison statements. Okay, num1 is equal to 2, num1 is not equal to 2, num1 is greater than 2, num1 is less than 2, num1 is greater than equal to 2, or num1 is less than equal to 2. All these are comparison statements. Okay, what happens if we have two comparison statements? Well, between two or more comparison statements, like if I write another number 3 here, num3 is equal to, let's say, 15. Okay, num3 is equal to, let's say, 20. If I write num1 less than num2 or num1 greater than this is called compounding comparison statements, num3. Okay, this is one statement, num1 is greater than num3, and this is another statement, num1 is less than num2. Well, let's see what these brackets are, blue brackets are for the print statement. Okay, between two comparison statements we have an or. Whenever there is an or between two comparison statements, whenever there are two comparison statements, even two or more comparison statements, you could have statement 1, you could have OR, then you can have statement 2, you could have OR, and you can have statement 3, and you can have OR, and you can have statement 4. Okay, the rule you need to remember for OR is, if there are multiple ORs between statements and there are all ORs, not no ANDs, OR here, and OR here, and if there are multiple statements and they are separated by ORs, the rule is that even if one of the statement is true, for example statement 2 is true, statement 1 is false, statement 3 is false, statement 4 is false, even if one statement is true, the whole answer of this whole thing will be true also. Whole thing will become true. Okay, that's the rule of OR. So now let's use this rule to evaluate this statement. Is number 1 less than equal to number 2? Is number 1 less than number 2? No, this is false. Or is number 1 greater than number 3? No, this is also false, because number 1 is 15, number 3 is 20. So this is also false. So false or false should together make false. If I write this out, this should give me a false. And let me just separate this by print this thing. Let's print this and see what the answer is. And you can see that the answer here is false. Just like I said, it should be false. It's false. Okay. The answer of this thing is false here. Okay. That's the rule for false. Now let's make it positive. Like let's change this sign to less than. Okay, let's change this sign to less than and see what happens now. Is the first statement true? Is the first statement true? The first statement here is false, because number 1 is not less than number 2, right? 15 is not less than 2. So this thing is false. What about the second statement? Number 1 is less than number 3. Number 1 is 15, number 3 is 20. So yes, this one is true. And in between the two statements there is an OR. And I told you that even if one OR is true, between two statements, if with an OR in between them, even if one statement is true, the overall answer becomes true. This is the way Boolean logic works. Okay. And so the answer to this thing now, this thing should become true. Let's run it. Now you can see it has become true. Okay. Similarly, we have another thing called AND. So if I try to erase this, and I replace, let's suppose you have two or more statements and in between there are ANDs, and A and D and A and D and A and D and. So for AND, all the statements need to be true, true and true and true and true for the whole thing to be overall true. Even if one of the thing is false, if this was false, this was true, this was true, and this was true, one thing has become false, right? And the one thing that becomes false makes the whole thing false. That's the way AND works, okay? For AND, everything needs to be true for the overall thing to be true. For AND, only it takes only one thing to be false for the overall thing to be false. So let's see this thing in action. Let's write the same statement again. Copy the same statement down. Print, now I am going to put print num1 is greater than number 2. Okay, so let's first see